My host dad called the school and told the school that I went home. I got homesick, and I went home, and I'm not coming back. And so then they never called again and asked where I was.
That is so cool.
Right? And I spent the last half of the year in the hospital, and just did, it was amazing.
Paging Dr. Cook. Paging Dr. Cook. Dr. Cook, you're wanted in the OR. Dr. Cook, you're wanted in the OR.
Welcome to the Prescription for Success podcast with your host, Dr. Randy Cook.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Prescription for Success podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Randy Cook. Our show is a production of MD Coaches, providing leadership and executive coaching for physicians by physicians to overcome burnout, transition your career, develop as a leader, or whatever your goal might be. Visit MD Coaches on the web at mymdcoaches.com, because you're not in this alone. My guest today planned at an early age to become a cardiologist, but instead he became one of the world's most highly respected podiatrists, as well as a politician and film producer along the way. So let's hear my conversation with Dr. Lee Rogers. It is my real pleasure to be having a conversation today with one of the most renowned podiatrists, I think, in the world, Dr. Lee Rogers. Welcome to Prescription for Success, and thanks for taking the time to be with us.
Happy to be here.
Well, Lee, I don't know if you've had an opportunity to hear any of our shows. You're a pretty busy man, so maybe not, but we like to begin at the beginning. So that's exactly what I'm going to do with you. I know that although you were born in Elgin, Illinois, you did most of your growing up in Gallatin, Missouri. Is that right?
That's correct.
And one thing that I think a lot of people might find interesting, based on the incredible accomplishments that you have underneath your name, is it looks like you got pretty much all of your formative education in public schools, right?
Yeah, that's true. Well, I did go to public school for obviously high school, and then a public. I went to a state-sponsored school for college, Truman State University.
Right. But the one thing I want to, excuse me for interrupting you, but the one thing that I want to really underline is a very special thing, and that is, I think it was during your senior year in high school that you were selected for the Congress Bundestag Youth Exchange that sent you to Germany for a year. And I really want to hear about that. Were you a German speaker at the time and therefore had some interest, or how did you make that connection?
No, I learned German there. I did a total immersion program. It was so the Congress Bundestag exchange program was set up post World War II and it's funded both by Congress and the German Congress, which is Bundestag.
Right. And
it was meant to reduce, some of the bad feelings that existed between the Germans and the Americans. And so
you bet.
It's been going on that long and funded by the government that long. And they take, it's not exactly one per state, but it's about 50 from the U.S. and we have that exchange. So I tried several years in a row to get it, because you don't have to go when you're a senior. I just made it my senior year. Mm-hmm. And our counselor at our school was successful in getting 5 people to go on this exchange trip we had a tiny school. Gallatin, Missouri is a small town of 2,000 people in Missouri. And they just got known for always being able to send somebody there. And he coached us how to get through the interview. But 4 people in a row had gone before me and before I tried, and they just didn't want to give it to the same school over and over again. So they gave our school a couple of years break, and then I went my senior year.
I have to tell you, that would have been, I can't even find the words to describe the intimidation that I would have felt. A lot of people thought I was brave because I had a radio station. I had a job at a radio station when I was a senior in high school, but to be picked to go and participate in something like that just blows my mind. And I want to know more. When you got there, was it intimidating? Did you wonder if you'd made the right decision? Was learning German difficult? Give us the details.
Well, first, before you even left, they took you to Washington, D.C., and you met your member of Congress, and that'll come into play probably later on when you talk about some of the things I've done and got me interested in how the legislator works. But you do that, then you get to Germany and you meet the German member of Congress, and then you start out in this small town in central Germany where you have, and this was it wasn't that long post Cold War, right? Where when I went over there, I went in 1995-ish, and so. Yeah. There still was a big difference between East and West Germany at that time, and now you really can't tell the difference. But at that time you really could, and so you get there, you go to this total immersion German program, and a lot of my counterparts they had taken German before. I hadn't, but in 1 month of total immersion, you're pretty good at that point, and I was probably, I'd say, fluent by Christmas. This is you start sometime in July. I think we went for our month, but everything you do is in German.
But most of the people who were learning with you were kind of in the same boat. Were they part of the exchange program?
Right. Oh yeah, everybody there was were all Americans from the exchange program, and they did tell you weren't allowed to speak English the whole time when you were at there. But of course, when you're 17 and you're going out at nighttime, and that's the first experience I ever had going out to bars too, being 17.
Is that right?
Oh yeah, you don't go out to a bar in America at 17, so there you do.
That's right.
So it was an interesting experience, and one that I think helped to open my eyes to really understand the global nature of just how different we are, but how similar we are as well, right? And that's
I bet it did.
So I've done a lot of traveling since then, as you probably know. I've been in over 40 countries, and so but that was my first experience, and one that I'll always cherish.
Have you been able to hang on to your fluency in German, I wonder?
Es ist seit 20 Jahren, bis ich Deutsch gesprochen habe, aber ich kann noch verstehen.
Jawohl, ist ein guter German speaker.
Vielen Dank.
Yeah, it's been a long time since I took German, but man, that's really impressive. And I got to think that it really had a profound impact on you and your conception of the world. So
it did, and let me tell you, this is probably something I don't think I've ever said publicly about my experience and how things happened there. But when I got there, my host grandfather was a doctor in the community, and he lived in the house with my host mom and my host dad. Yeah. He was older; he just had retired, and so I knew I wanted to be a doctor, and I wanted to see how things worked over there. So he had set me up about halfway through the year in the German hospital, and he just told the hospital that I was a medical student from America, and so it's not that unbelievable, because they're medical students are around the same age in Germany, because they go straight into medical school out of high school, and so they let me go around the hospital, and they taught me how to scrub into surgery. I did all sorts of stuff that you would never do as a high school student in America. And so at probably they call it, and you can do this in Germany, you can get out of school to go do what's called a practicum, which is getting practical experience in some field that you want to. So I started by doing this practicum, which was allowed by the school. And then after about halfway through the year, I told my host family, I said, look, I don't want to go back to school, and I'd rather just go hang out in the hospital the whole time, and because I'm learning so much. And so my host dad called the school and told the school that I went home. I got homesick, and I went home, and I'm not coming back. And so then so they never called again and asked where I was.
That is so cool.
Right? And I spent the last half of the year in the hospital, and just did, it was amazing.
Oh my, that's just incredible. And it's really fascinating to me that that's kind of where your medical education truly began. And but now when you got back home,
well, let me tell you this one thing too. It's not there's nothing like being in a German ward early in the morning, because you got the nurse, which is called the Krankenschwester, the sick sister. But
that sounds like a good name for the chief nurse.
Yeah, and these are like some battle axe nurses. I mean, they don't take any grief from anybody. And so they go down the hallway at like 5 o'clock in the morning, and they're, pretty loud and waking all the patients up, and they're yelling "Aufwecken," which is wake up, and Fieber messen, measure your temperature, Bettwechseln, change your bed. So they get everybody out of the bed at like 5 in the morning. You go sit in the chair. All the patients have to sit in the chair. They get their vitals done and everything, and then the other team comes in and changes the bed real quick before you get back in. And, the medical students are all through there. That's why I was through at that time. Yeah. And so it's, when you think you get up early in America and get your vitals done, it's not like it is over there where they scare the crap out of you at 5 in the morning.
I wonder what their patient satisfaction scores are like. Do you ever think about that?
I don't think they care.
Sounds like. Man, that's a great story and a great way for you to start your career. And so, and when you got back home, what happens? Do you go through a traditional high school graduation, or
I did then? Yeah, right? My high school counselor was awesome. He had dealt with so many people that had gone over to Germany, and so he said, the experience itself is going to be great for you. I don't even want to see, you don't need to have a grade card or anything like that. He said, which was good because I didn't go half the year to school. But he said, he said, we're just going to take your last year's GPA and we're just going to duplicate it for this year. And that's that, right. And so I came back and went through my graduation and all of that.
Right. And as you said, it sounds like you were planning on a medical career from the outset and got on into undergraduate school at Truman State. And at that point, did you have any idea that it was going to be podiatry as opposed to more generalized medicine, or when did that decision take place?
Yeah, I didn't know. At that point, I didn't think so. I thought I wanted to be a cardiologist, not really having any experience in any of the other disciplines, just my own thoughts. And then I started as an EMT in the ambulance service in our, it wasn't our college town, but it was just south of our college town. That was Kirksville, Missouri. And south of our college town was a smaller town, Macon, and another tiny town called La Plata. And they needed EMTs. They didn't have anybody that was down there working. And so I took the course in Missouri and I went down there. And that was an unbelievable experience too, because you're in a rural area. There's no help when something goes wrong. You just have to scoop them up, stick them in the ambulance, and do what you can all the way to the hospital. I remember that's kind of the first time. That was 1996, 7, 8. That was when we first started really getting cell phones, personally, instead of like the expensive bag phones and that. So, but we were still talking on the radio mostly back and forth to the hospital, and you'd be talking to the hospital, and you'd go in a dip of a hill, and then because it's really line of sight with radio traffic, and then you'd lose the hospital. Yeah. Then you get up to the top of the hill, and the driver would tell you, okay, we're coming to the top of the hill. So you come to the top of the hill, then you start speaking really fast again, and then you go over the next hill, and then and so especially if you needed some medical direction, if somebody was coding or anything like that. But it was a pretty, that also gives you a lot of experience, and I'll tell you,
I dare say,
to this day, whenever there's a medical emergency on an airplane, which I travel all the time, the year before the pandemic, I was on, or I was in a hotel 250 nights in the year, and I was on a plane a lot of that. But I respond to maybe, 1 to 3 medical emergencies on an airplane a year, just because of the frequency of my flights. Going through podiatry school and having the traditional, medical training and even in emergency medicine and in internal medicine, none of that helps me on an airplane in an emergency. Being an EMT or a paramedic helps you because you are
absolutely,
you're used to helping extricate somebody from between, a fallen piece of furniture and a whatever, right. or out of a vehicle. Where on an airplane you have no room, you have no lab, you have no help. Right. Everything is, you can't hear. They have stethoscopes in the emergency kits on the plane. You can't hear anything out of a stethoscope in an airplane, and so you can't even hear the blood pressure. Now they have the automated wrist cuffs, but when I remember many times on a plane I've had to try to take somebody's blood pressure, and you basically just get systolic by palpation because you can't hear anything.
Mm-hmm.
That's the ultimate kind of emergency. No help whatsoever. I've done CPR on a plane a number of times. One lady died in between Korea. Where was I leaving? It was either Korea or Hong Kong, and coming to Chicago. And a lady died over the North Pole.
My goodness.
Nowhere to land. We did CPR for like 45 minutes, and at that point, you're not. Once there's no coming back from that, you don't land early in Canada because what's the point, So you just carry on and put the patient in a seat, lay them down, and that's that. But, it creates a somber mood on the airplane the rest of the time. Everybody's
I'm sure
quite aware of what happened.
But you're so right. In that particular situation, the only thing to do is ABC,
right?
And every paramedic, that's kind of how you start.
And also being authoritative, I think, really helps too.
Absolutely.
I've done some where another doctor has helped out in some cases, and it doesn't matter what their specialty is, but they just are unused to the scenario and not a little wishy-washy on what to do, and that's not, you have to be very decisive when you're talking to the captain and asking to whether or not they should land the plane. That used to be in the decision of it's always in the decision of the captain on the airplane.
Sure.
But it used to be mostly a decision that a medical person on the flight would help to make with the captain. Now, all airplanes have ground medical control where you speak to them on the phone now, on the radio. So you go up.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, so you go up to either near in the galley in the front or in the cockpit. I've had to go a couple of times. And and they hand you what looks like a phone. And so then you communicate with the ground control, the medical control. And you explain to the doctor who's their full-time medical control or hired by them. I think several airlines hire the same company. And then they say whether or not the captain should land early, because that's a very expensive diversion, usually. Mm-hmm. But the most interesting one I ever had, I was on a flight from Seattle to Miami overnight. So I was sleeping. I got upgraded, thankfully. So I'm sleeping already. And then flight attendant comes, wakes me up and says, "Doctor, do you mind? We have a medical they know you're a doctor. It's in your profile." They said, "Yeah, we have a medical emergency in the aft lavatory. Woman's pregnant. She can't stop vomiting. Can you go take a look?" So there's not a lot to do in that case, right? So you go back there, and they did have Phenergan in the kit, and so gave her some Phenergan and tried to flatten some Sprite and gave her some of that. And I just told her she's going to be uncomfortable, but there's not. And she was in her first trimester, and I said there's not a lot you can do. And so I just got back to sleep, and then the flight attendant comes back and wakes me up again. She goes, "I'm so sorry. We have another medical emergency on the flight, but this one you have to keep quiet because it's in the cockpit." And I said,
"Oh my God!"
I said, "Oh, okay." So I go.
That's not what I would want to hear.
No. So I went up in the cockpit, and it's the co-pilot who was having a DVT. And he knew he was having a DVT because they're trained to recognize the symptoms of that.
Yeah.
He was younger; he never had one before, and he had a really swollen, hot calf, and it was painful. So the captain puts me on with medical control, and he tells me, reminds me, "Remember, this is not a phone. It looks like a phone, but it's a radio. Everybody can hear everything you say, so don't say anything inappropriate." So I told medical control, and I don't know what's in the medical kits. You wouldn't either. And it's not my job to know what's in the kit. So I just said, "Do you have any Lovenox in the kit?" And he the medical control, he seemed a little grumpy. It was like 2 a.m, and he was like, "No, there's no Lovenox in the kit. Just have him chew up 2 aspirin. And you don't need to land for this, and then he can get it taken care of whenever he lands, And so both the pilots turned around and looked at me. I'm sitting in the jump seat behind, so I can use the phone. And both of them turn around and look at me like to see if I agree with what he said, because they can hear in their headset what he's saying. And so they could tell that I didn't agree with it. And as soon as we got off the phone, I said, "I think he just said take 2 aspirin and call him in the morning." And they both thought that was it. But there's that you can't, that's not the appropriate thing to do for a DVT. And so, not that we needed to land early, but it's interesting to have that experience.
Hi, I'm Rhonda Crow, founder and CEO for MD Coaches. Here on RX for Success, we interview a lot of great medical professionals on how they grew their careers, how they overcame challenges, and how they handle day-to-day work. I really hope you're getting a lot of great information. But if you're looking for an answer to a specific problem, management or administration challenge, or if you're feeling just a bit burnt out, like maybe you chose the wrong career, well, then there's a faster way to get the help you need. No, it's not counseling, it's coaching. RX for Success is produced by MD Coaches, a team of physicians who have been where you are. I know you're used to going it alone, but you don't have to. Get the support you need today. Visit us at mymdcoaches.com to schedule your complimentary consultation. Again, that's mymdcoaches.com, because you're not in this alone.
We'll get back to our interview in just a moment, but right now I want to tell you a little bit about Physician Outlook. If you haven't discovered this remarkable magazine, please do so very soon. It was created by physicians, for physicians, to showcase the intersection between clinical and non-clinical interests. Whether it's writing, painting, cooking, politics, and dozens of other topics, Physician Outlook gives a physician perspective. It's available online and in print. It's really unique among physician lifestyle magazines. And like the Prescription for Success podcast, Physician Outlook amplifies the voice of any physician who has something to say. It also engages patients who still believe in physician-led, team-based care. And Prescription for Success listeners can get 3 months free when you enter our promo code RX for Success and select the monthly option at checkout. That's a really great deal on this stunning publication. And now let's get back to today's interview. I'm going to go ahead and ask you something that might be a little touchy, but it's my show and I want to know. Do you feel that he was, that this other doctor was being dismissive of your idea because you were a podiatrist and not an MD?
Well, he didn't know. He didn't know what my specialty was.
Okay.
No. I think he was just grumpy because it was in the middle of the night, and he got woken up. You know, I mean, really, I treat DVTs all the time. That's one of the things that's in my scope of practice. But I think he was just. They probably deal with a lot of different types of medical personnel, and they're not used to those medical personnel are not used to in-flight emergencies. They probably have a lot of egos sometimes, and so they, I assume that's what it was, but. I wanted to remind him that I didn't, but I wanted to remind him that I was asleep in first class and I got up to volunteer my time to help take care of this problem. You're getting paid to take care of the problem. You should be nice. But
yeah, it's hard. I'm having a hard time getting over that. I mean, somebody that's in a warm bed somewhere and seemingly has not been able to digest the level of anxiety that must have existed in that airplane at that time is a little bit disappointing to me. So I hope they're screening their medical assistants a little better. It's a little bit of a disturbing story. So
well, everything turned out okay in the end. So that's
everybody got on the ground and
got on the ground. I instructed he was the co-pilot, and I instructed him not to use his. I've flown planes before myself, so I had a private pilot's license. But I instructed him not to use his feet on the rudder pedals because that really is it would cause a lot of calf pumping. And the captain said, "Well, I'll use my feet if I have to." Most of the time, he says, we use our hands, and the computer just flies the plane all the way down.
That's exactly right. Yeah, in the modern day aircraft, that's so true, as you know, being a pilot. Yeah, those are some great stories. I have to have you come back and just do an entire show on airplane stories.
Yeah, oh yeah,
great idea.
Actually, that wouldn't be a bad idea. What to do in an in-flight emergency, and it doesn't matter what your specialty is or anything. There's as you said, it's about the ABCs, but there's also different changes in physiology from the pressure,
from the pressurization,
right? Yeah, and it's just like this. I won't belabor the stories anymore, but just one part is that the flight crew doesn't understand that the oxygen that they give you whenever somebody needs oxygen, they come and they bring you a bottle of oxygen. it's not medical oxygen, it's air.
Right.
And so, you're on a plane. It's cabin's pressurized to 6,000 feet, or maybe even a little bit higher than that.
So you're hypoxic already.
You're a little hypoxic, but and especially if you're having chest pain or something like that. But when patients put a mask on, like the masks that they have on a plane, they feel very claustrophobic, and they're not really getting the benefit of 100% O2 that you would expect to get on the ground with medical oxygen. They don't carry oxygen on the plane; they carry air. And just like if you're diving, if you're scuba diving, you're just breathing air. You're not breathing oxygen. So.
Right. Wow. Really interesting story. Well, as much as I would like to stay in that territory, let's get you back into your education. At what point did you make the decision that it was going to be podiatry and not cardiology?
I as an EMT, we got called to this one podiatrist's office all the time for hypoglycemia. That was pretty much the whole thing. Every time it was, and wasn't anything he did. It was just the nature of the patient.
I hadn't thought about that, but yeah, that would happen.
Yeah. And
happened in my wound center all the time.
Oh, yeah? Oh, well, there you go. Yeah. So and he was treating wounds. That's what he was doing. He was treating diabetic foot wounds. And I would come in there and, imagine never having seen, since you know how to treat wounds, never having seen a wound debridement before, and then seeing it for the first time, you're like, wow. I can't imagine that somebody does that in their office, and they don't use anesthesia. That's just crazy, And so it's, So seeing that made me really explore the specialty he was in, and all of that. And I realized that I could do a lot of good in that field and, be a leader. And so I started applying to podiatry schools.
Did you know any podiatrist at the time?
Just him.
Okay.
Yeah. And I think that's a good question, because and I know this data from the American Podiatric Medical Association. They look at what kind of people get into podiatry. Most of the people that get in had some type of early experience with a podiatrist, even as a patient, and so they were a teenager and had maybe playing sports and had some type of problem, or even an ingrown toenail or whatever, and they had an experience with a podiatrist, and that's how they got introduced to the profession, because the profession doesn't do that good of a job of getting the message out with these pre-med counselors and other things. I don't know if you even ever heard of or considered the profession when you were looking at med schools, but.
Well, it's an interesting point that you bring up, and we can expand on this if you like. I grew up in Alabama, and the practice of medicine in Alabama was totally regulated by a board of medical examiners and a board of medicine, and it was totally populated by MDs. Not even any DOs at that time. And they made the rules. And the rules were, if you were a podiatrist, you could do anything that you want to up to the ankle, and that's it. And for that reason, it is hard to find a podiatrist in Alabama.
Well, and that's
back in those days.
I think
unfortunately,
it's still
things
hard.
have changed. Well, it's improved in the Division of Orthopedics, or the Department of Orthopedics at University of Alabama in Birmingham. They have several podiatrists on the faculty, so it has come a really long way.
But if you think about the demographic of the South, and we know one of the worst scopes of practice for podiatrists is in Mississippi, in the country. One of the worst is there. And you think about
believe that.
The demographic of and the patient need in that area, and it's all about the diabetic foot at that point. And
you talk about an inverse curve,
yes.
The need versus the availability.
Right.
Yeah, that's terrible.
Right. And it's, when I go around, this is how podiatry is changing. When I go around the world, and I tell young people this all the time, when they're either, young podiatrists or going through their training, they're interested in, I want to do a calcaneal fracture. I want to do a bunion surgery as good as I can do it, or something like that. And I say, look, I get invited to lecture all over the world. And you know why they ask me to come over and talk to their doctors? It's not about who can do a calcaneal fracture better. It's all about the diabetic foot and preventing amputations, because they're having an epidemic of amputations everywhere. I go to Saudi Arabia, Romania, all over the place. And they say, who is the person that can help us to educate us and help to develop some strategies to avoid these amputations, it's an American podiatrist. That's what they look for. And so people should be proud of their profession in that way, because you do have that very specific expertise, and it's something that is sorely needed and is only growing, as you know, from being in wound care.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm really impressed with how it's turned around. And quite frankly, I'm a little surprised that Alabama has improved as quickly as they have, because most of the time we're right there with Mississippi. As I say, I'm very proud to have podiatrists in the Department of Orthopedics at UAB, and that's a good thing. But I want to get back to your training and development. Now, you got your DPM at Des Moines University and went on to a limb salvage fellowship with David Armstrong. Was that also in Des Moines, or was he someplace else at that point?
No, I was at Des Moines University, and I was influenced a lot by two professors, really, but one in the diabetic foot, and that was Robert Freiberg, and he was an associate dean there. The other that influenced me a lot was Vince Mandrake, and he really influenced me on requiring evidence for everything that you do, and knowing the literature. But Bob Freiberg told me, he said, look, he said there aren't that many diabetic people that are true diabetic foot experts in the country, or in the world for that matter. He says if you specialize in the diabetic foot, he said everything you write will be published, and you'll be invited to speak everywhere, and we need people in this field. So
that's great advice.
So I did. I thought that's great, and so I started reading all the literature, and so a couple of this gets into later when I talk about my prescriptions. One of my feelings is that you can't accept no for an answer usually, and that's and I've been told so many no's. I mean, and I think
I bet you have.
Everybody's going to be told no multiple times in their life, but when I was in podiatry school, I wanted to go to the most known diabetic foot meeting in the world. And at the time, that was called the Diabetic Foot Update. Larry Harkless was running it at University of Texas, San Antonio. And I saw the speaker list. This is 2002. I saw the speaker list, and the speakers were everybody I had been reading about. And,
Right.
Imagine that feeling when you're a student and you're I pulled all sorts of articles. I was the number one article requester at the library at Des Moines University. and so I have been reading all these people's articles. And so I talked to Freiberg, and I said, hey, I want to go to this meeting. It's 3 days long. It's in December. And he says, you're going to learn so much at that meeting. Yes, you can have an excused absence and you can go. And so then the dean of the university found out about it, Dr. Yoho, who he and I are good friends, and we have a great relationship. But he found out about it, and he told me, Lee, I can't let you go to this meeting. If I let you go, I have to let everybody go to a meeting. And
geez.
I said, well, why not? That makes a lot of sense. And at the time, I was president of the student body, so I had regular meetings with them. And I said, look, I'm going to go to this meeting. I said, I already paid for my flight. And a student, you don't have any money. I already paid for my flight. I already got. And I said, I'm going to go. And he said, well, if you go, you're going to make up your absence 3-1 days. And I said, fine, I'll do it over the summer. Make up my absence. And I went to the meeting.
Just don't throw me in the briar patch, I guess.
And it was the most impactful thing that happened to me in the diabetic foot, seeing all these people. I can
believe that.
The last speech he gave before he died, Paul Brand. I saw his speech. I actually have his speech on my YouTube.
Did you really?
Right. Yeah. I put it. I got a recording of it. I put it on my YouTube page. You can go to my YouTube page and watch it. But he's talking about how he discovered the link between neuropathy and ulceration in lepers in India, and he's got all these pictures, and it was an amazing thing. So you can imagine how impactful that was. So it was the right decision to do that. But that was one of my no's. And then I remember when I was going into my fourth year, I was getting no's left and right usually, because things I wanted to do weren't that typical, but I wanted to go do a rotation in England with Andrew Bolton, and they had never done an international rotation before from the college. And so I said, well, it's with Andrew. They said, we don't want you to go over there and take a month's vacation. I said, I'm not going to take a vacation. I'm going to spend time with this guy who's the godfather of the diabetic foot. And so they finally agreed to let me do this international rotation. So I go over there, and and I'd been trying to get in to do a rotation at the Mayo Clinic with Peter Dick. and they wouldn't take podiatrists. So this is one of those cases where you might say it was a little discriminatory, but the Mayo Clinic wasn't willing to take a podiatrist to do a rotation. And I had been emailing Peter Dick, who's the he and his son both there. It's Peter Dick Sr. and Peter Dick Jr. They call him Big Dick and Little Dick, by the way. That's the truth. No, that's the truth at Mayo. But DYCK is how you spell their name.
We get it.
They are they're both the preeminent thought leaders in diabetic neuropathy, right? So I thought, this is, when else do you get a chance to spend a month with somebody that you really admire and look up to, and you can in school, So I wanted to do that. They wouldn't let a podiatrist come, and our school was a little peeved about that, and they were like, well, you can't go then. And I'd sent several letters to Peter Dick, and he had never replied back to me, actually. And so when I got over to England, Andrew Bolton, just chatting with me, said, what else are you doing this year? And I said, I'm really trying to get to see Peter Dick, but I can't get into the Mayo Clinic. They won't take a podiatrist. And so he's like, Peter, he's like, And so he picks up his phone, his landline, and he dials a number, and he says, Peter, it's Andrew. I got this podiatry student here who wants to come spend a month with you. And he goes, is that the guy that's been writing me all these letters? And he said, yeah.
Oh my goodness.
So he said, okay, fine. He can come here as a month for a research apprenticeship. He says, they don't care what he is for that. He can come and spend some time with me, and we'll call it a research apprenticeship. And so I told the school, and they said, good news. Mayo's going to take me as a research apprenticeship for a month. And they said, well, we don't have that rotation. You can't do a research rotation. I said, who cares what it's called? It's going to be there, and so eventually we got that figured out, and so that's part of it, is keeping your eye on the ball, knowing what your goals are, don't take no for an answer, and figure out a way around the no.
I think that is maybe the best story of unabashed determination that I have ever heard. And I'm honored that I got to hear it on my program here. So thanks a million.
No, thank you.
For sharing that with us, and clearly that entire experience had a profound impact on you, because limb salvage and limb preservation has more or less been, if I may offer this supposition, it's been more or less what your professional life has been about. Am I missing the point there? Or
no, that's right. Yeah. So I doing my residency in New York City at St. Vincent Catholic Medical Centers, where you just had a tremendous amount of patients with problems that could lead to limb loss, both diabetic, which was the majority of them, but also it was still during, I'd say, kind of the tail end of the AIDS epidemic. I'm not trying to belittle what the AIDS epidemic is today, but it's more of a treatable chronic disease than it is a deadly illness anymore. But when I was doing my residency, it was when that was being transitioned, and during that transition, with some of these early drugs that were being used for HIV, they had a lot of side effects. And not only did HIV itself lead to neuropathy, but a lot of the drugs were leading to neuropathy. And so we were seeing these patients come in immunosuppressed, looking just like a diabetic foot wound. And they were patients with HIV and a neuropathic wound. And it was hard to tell the difference between the patients. And so that I got that experience there as well. I wrote the first article about Charcot as a result of HIV neuropathy, because we saw it there. But so that, just getting the tremendous volume there, then, knowing Armstrong at a lot of these meetings, keeping in touch with him. The first time I met him was at that meeting in San Antonio that I just told you about, where I went as a student. And so I did his fellowship. He was not in Des Moines. He was in, at that time, Chicago at Rosalind Franklin University. And so they didn't have funding for the fellowship. So I had to go out and raise my own money for the fellowship, which I did. Got funding through a grant from a company at the time. I think it was called at that time called Small Bone Innovations. And with the promise to do research on some of their devices, which we did, I was happy to make that exchange. And so I did my fellowship with David. And after that, that's kind of the thing, finding a good mentor. You can really write your own ticket after that point.
Yeah.
And
he's a good one, isn't he?
He's fantastic. Yeah. And his mentorship continues throughout your life. That's what's great about David. He never, once you're his student, you're always a student. But
he's been on the show, and boy, has he got some great stories. So that wraps up part 1 of my conversation with Dr. Lee Rogers. I hope you'll make plans to join me for part 2, which we'll release on October 25. Remember, you can get more information about our guests and hear them face my rapid-fire questions at our Patreon site. And while you're there, you can subscribe to the podcast and give us a rating and hopefully offer suggestions on what you'd like to hear in future episodes. Thanks very much to Ryan Jones, who composed and performs our theme music for us. We're glad you could join us today, and don't forget to fill your prescription for success with my next episode.